I see here the Leviathan that risked whatever they could of the faces of the saints. And it comes ridden by Satan himself. And after talking about everything that comes from evil, we see here on this side an image of the Dormition of Mary, one of the 400 churches filled with frescoes, including one that really interests us. Jorge joined the cavalry. I'm dressed in the clothes and weapons of Jorge, so that my enemies have hands, but do not touch me. Today I am dressed in the clothes and weapons of Jorge. I am here in Cappadocia, where tradition tells us that he was born and spent his childhood and early years before becoming a soldier, and went out into the world to save the princess, killing the dragon that threatened her. What tradition tells us is that Jorge was born around the year 280 after Christ. Over 2 centuries after Jesus' crucifixion, Christianity was already established in Cappadocia. What the legend says is that the dragon lived in a cave very close to a village and threatened to kill everyone. The villagers then offered everything they could, even started sacrificing young women to see if they could calm it down. That dragon, until St. George appeared with his spear. At the moment when the king's daughter was about to be sacrificed, St. George killed the dragon and saved the princess. At the time when he lived, Cappadocia was a Roman province, like many other places here in the Middle East and in the rest of the known world. Today we are in Turkey, but the saint lived long before the arrival of the Turks. And that's why he received a Greek name, because Greek was the cultured language of that distant time. Georgios means someone who works with the land, but that doesn't mean Jorge was a farm worker. It was just a name. The music of the brilliant Jorge from Rio de Janeiro is just the most sublime expression of Jorge of Cappadocia in Brazilian culture. Hail Jorge, benjo. Wizard of simple and profound songs. In Brazil, one of the largest soccer fan bases is the Avinegro from Parque São Jorge. And Corinthians fans always invoke Jorge Guerrero to protect the team. In Rio de Janeiro, it's been more than 2 decades since St. George's Day became a holiday. The devotees hope that the saint brings them protection and count on the warrior spirit of Jorge da Cappadocia. But who was St. George after all? In what era did he live? Did he really kill the dragon? And why, after all, is there such great devotion to this saint from Cappadocia? History and archaeology have found few traces of St. George's life here in Cappadocia. Later, a tradition came to say that he was born into a noble and Christian family. But it's a tradition that doesn't have strong evidence to allow us to say that this is exactly what happened. I simply can't state that. There's no way to say for sure. But what we do know for sure is that Christianity arrived very early here in Cappadocia, so much so that we have 2 references. Already in the New Testament, that is, books very close to the time of Jesus, they already mentioned the existence of Christians here in Cappadocia. There is a reference in the first letter of St. Peter and also right in the 2nd chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. On that day, Jews from Cappadocia were present and heard Peter preach. Peter, apostle of Jesus Christ. To the elect who are strangers of the dispersion in Pontus, in Galatia, in Cappadocia, in Asia, and in Bithynia. This was one of the regions to which Christianity had spread from Jerusalem, mainly because Christians needed to flee in order not to be killed by the Roman Empire. And what about here? And here, Christians also built underground cities to hide from invaders. Could it be that Jorge was born underground, at the top of one of these cities carved into the rocks? What has come down to us is that Jorge of Cappadocia followed his father's profession and became a soldier, working for the Roman Empire. Later, he advanced in his career and became an advisor, getting very close to Emperor Diocletian. In the early 4th century, Diocletian began a systematic persecution of Christians. This was shortly before Constantine ended that persecution. Emperor Diocletian claimed that Christians were not loyal to his rule and blamed them for the crisis the empire had experienced. Last century, he ordered Christian manuscripts seized and burned, requiring everyone in the empire to follow Roman religion. It is said that this order from Emperor Diocletian was a very harsh blow. As for the soldier Jorge, he was a Christian, and from that moment on, he would have to persecute, torture, and kill Christians. And what is told is that Jorge chose the path of faith, left the Roman army, and went on to practice Christianity. However, he was persecuted, tortured, and beheaded. The accounts that have reached us are imprecise, but they suggest that Jorge died at the beginning of the 4th century, when he was between 25 and 30 years old. In Lida, now in Israel, after Christian persecution ended, stories about Saint Jorge's life and example became more prominent, and in 494 he was canonized by Pope Gelasius I. But the truth is that nothing that had happened until then would compare to the devotion and popularity that would come later for Saint Jorge. And not only here in Cappadocia, where he grew up and spent his early years, but throughout the entire Christian world. Saint Jorge is the patron saint of countries he never visited, such as Portugal, Ethiopia, and England, where in fact several kings were named George. Saint Jorge is also the patron saint of the region of Catalonia in Spain and of very famous cities such as Venice and Moscow. But how did this devotion grow so much after all? Humanity evolved around the campfire, and I always like to talk around the campfire because the greatest stories have been told for thousands and thousands of years around a campfire. My little campfire here is a small gas cylinder. But I wanted to invite you to have some Turkish coffee with me, which, for me, is the best coffee in the world. And while having this coffee, we're going to hear the story of St. George and the dragon. First, I light it. Let's make some coffee, right? So, look, first the water. Then the coffee grounds here. Then I'll mix it well. And it will cook on this fire. This is the big mystery, the big secret of Turkish coffee. It's cooked. It's not just quickly filtered. It stays in the water for a long time. Oh, this is the magical moment of Turkish coffee. Look, when it starts to foam, it changes color and rises too. Look. Look. Then I take it out and bring it back. One more time, I take it out, let it go down, and bring it back. Next time I'm going to drink, that's it. Now we can tell our story, right? I'll leave it here, I'll turn off the stove. This fable of St. George and the dragon is so fascinating. A lot of people know more about the story of the dragon than about St. George's own story. The coffee is perfect. Look, it's perfect. Here's the thing. The story is about a village that existed in North Africa where Libya is today. And it's said that there was a lake there where a dragon lived, and this dragon threatened to kill everyone in the village. So the villagers decided to offer 2 sheep a day to calm the dragon, but he was insatiable. They realized there was only one way. They started sacrificing children, offering girls so that the satisfied dragon wouldn't kill the entire village. I'm even going to have some coffee now because The story is getting intense. The people decided that the sacrifices would be chosen by lottery each day, and a girl from the village would be sacrificed according to that lottery. Suddenly, the king's daughter was chosen. The king understood that he had to accept the decision because it was necessary to save the village, and he offered his daughter so that she would be sacrificed to calm the dragon. And then a certain Jorge appeared. And Jorge was a Roman soldier passing through the region on his horse, and he was very moved by that story, determined to save the king's daughter while riding his horse. The holy warrior wasn't a saint yet, but later he would become one. Saint Jorge went after the dragon with his spear, killed the dragon, and saved the entire village. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? It's no wonder that wherever we go, we hear about Saint Jorge from here in Cappadocia, this wonderful place where I'm having this delicious Turkish coffee. Hold on, because there's a lot more story for us to hear. The image of Saint Jorge facing the dragon is so fascinating and symbolic. He's brave, courageous, riding on his horse. That became part of popular imagination, and it got to the point where we even started seeing Saint Jorge in the craters of the moon. It's the triumph of good over evil, which lights our way on moonlit nights. And that reminds me of another legend from Greek mythology. Perseus has to face Medusa, the girl who was turned into a sea monster with her body covered in scales. Snakes, serpents emerging where hair should be. And she has a strange power to turn people into stone when the serpents look at them. And Perseus went to save Princess Andromeda, the king's daughter, in a story very similar to that of St. George. The legend of the knight Jorge fighting the dragon comes from the Middle Ages, when other stories involving the warrior saint appeared. Jorge of Cappadocia has been honored in England since the 9th century. But then one of the famous English kings came into the picture, Ricardo I, the Lionheart. At the end of the 12th century, he joined the Crusades, and facing the fierce enemy, Ricardo Lionheart, he saw George's victory over the dragon as representing the victory of the Christians over the Muslims. Ricardo Lionheart made St. George the protector of English soldiers. More than that, the cross of St. George, by order of Ricardo Lionheart, was placed at the center of the flag of England. It's common for historians to link the rise in popularity of St. George with the Crusades, since St. George was a warrior, a martyr born here in Cappadocia, in the Middle East, very close to Jerusalem, which was the ultimate goal of the Crusades. And passing through here, they would have heard many legends about St. George, many stories, some legends, some real stories. The saint's popularity kept growing. In 1415, during the famous Battle of Agincourt, part of the brutal 100 Years' War between England and France, soldiers said they saw St. George fighting alongside the English, who won the battle even in World War I. The English soldiers said they saw St. George, and because of that, they were certain of victory. It's interesting that during the Middle Ages, as the fascination with the warrior saint grew, here in the land where he was born, many churches began to appear, some dedicated to him. We don't know today because there were no signs. They didn't leave names on the church doors. They were in caves, but many had frescoes that depict moments from the life of St. George. But in almost all of them, there's always the story of St. George facing a monster. I said monster because the idea that St. George fought a dragon wasn't a consensus here. No. We're going to see that now in a medieval church we're about to visit. One of them is in the Goreme Museum, a magical place where, for many centuries before and during the Middle Ages, Christian monks lived. Here in the caves, which were carved out by ancient inhabitants of the region, the monks created a city. They expanded the caves, did a lot of excavations, and built more than 400 churches embedded in the rocks. This is one of the many churches that exist here, but it holds a very special fresco. All the time we keep seeing churches and little chapels scattered throughout the monastery. But this one is quite special because it holds a very important image for this region. The one of St. George of Cappadocia, St. George. Next to his horse, a spear in his hand, killing the dragon. But look how interesting, in this scene, it's not a dragon, it's a gigantic serpent, like a python, an anaconda, or a sucuri, right? Next to it, we see an image of St. Helena in front of St. George, St. Onesimus, and in the background, an image of Jesus. Right above what we imagine was the altar of this very impressive little chapel, preserved since the Middle Ages, here in the caves of Goreme. According to the legend, the dragon lived in a cave very close to a village and threatened to kill everyone. The villagers then offered everything they could, even started sacrificing young women to see if they could calm the dragon. Until St. George appeared with his spear at the moment when the king's daughter was about to be sacrificed. St. George killed the dragon and saved the princess. It's worth noting that St. George is usually not depicted as a Roman soldier in medieval frescoes. Here, in his native Cappadocia and around the world, St. George appears dressed as a crusader knight, looking ready to reconquer Jerusalem. The view from anywhere I stop here is striking. It's impressive. I'm at the entrance of another religious area, the Church of Christ Pantocrator. It has no frescoes. We can see how the monks were concerned with decorating all the churches and chapels they built. This one, including with a cross. And here, it seems to be a side chapel. The sound here is different. Everything echoes. Everything makes me think of meditation and reflection. What was it, after all, that the monks were seeking? And the moment I step out here, there's frost. Not snow, because it's not cold enough for that, but it's frost. It's nice. This church was named St. John Church. One of the 400 churches that the Orthodox Christians built here in Cappadocia. Like all of them, it is very welcoming, small, and full of frescoes. Actually, one of them really interests us. I'll go up there. Let's take a look. As I'm going up here, I'm already appreciating these works of art from the Middle Ages. Around the 11th or 12th century, this second floor was built. Of course, there wasn't this wooden staircase back then. It was all made of stone. And here, at the main altar, there's a curiosity that will shock a lot of people. It's not just one saint killing the dragon, it's two saints killing two monsters, sea monsters that look like big serpents. On the right, St. George riding his white horse with the spear going into the mouth of the sea monster. On the other side, St. Theodosius, who was practically forgotten by Western history, but tradition tells us that he was also with St. George killing the sea monster. That makes me think that if in the Middle Ages no one talked about dragons in Cappadocia, where St. George was born, could this legend have come later? Could it be that the Christians of that time were thinking of Leviathan, the biblical monster that appears in so many books of the Old Testament, and even in the prophecies of Isaiah? I see here Leviathan, representing all evil, being defeated by the saint who represents good. This scene is beautiful, and here, right below the scene of St. George, there's a scene that would be an imagination of the moment of the apocalypse, of the final judgment, when God would come to earth to judge all human beings, living and dead, for what they have done. And it's interesting to see that the monster is practically the same. That was defeated by St. George, symbolizing all evil, and he comes ridden by Satan himself, the representative of all evil, Satan, according to the understanding of ancient Judaism, the accuser, and in this specific fresco, the monks are being judged. We can imagine that the monks who lived here were imagining their own fate on the day of the final judgment. Unfortunately, many images here have been vandalized. It's clear that the faces of the saints were targeted by vandals who were here, whether for religious reasons or just looters who passed through the place. And they wanted to leave their terrible mark of barbarism and intolerance. And here, on this side wall, there's a fresco showing St. George on his white horse, but unfortunately, this painting was vandalized. It's possible to imagine that it's St. George, before or after killing the sea monster and after talking about everything that comes from evil. Here on this side, we see an image of the Dormition of Mary. In the understanding of Orthodox Christians, Mary rested and was thus taken up to heaven. In the scene we see Mary accompanied by the apostles. I have the impression that the artist also wanted to depict Jesus at this moment of farewell, taking Mary up to heaven. And when I talk about this vandalism, it's important to understand that there are religious reasons for it. We can probably assume that it was Muslims when they conquered this place, Cappadocia, who scratched with their swords, even risking what they could, the faces of the saints, because according to the Islamic religion, there can be no eyes or faces. Images of people's faces in places of worship, in places of prayer. And it's possible to think that for some time, this place was used as a mosque, even if in an improvised way. Jorge da Cappadocia lived more than 1700 years ago, but he is a saint with immense popularity even today, loved by Catholics, Orthodox Christians, Druze, Muslims, and also highly revered in Candomblé. The devotion is so great that even though the official patron saint of Rio de Janeiro is Saint Sebastian, Saint George is worshipped as the unofficial patron saint of the city. Certainly the most beloved saint in Rio. And it's curious that we don't know St. George's thoughts. He didn't leave any texts, nothing written, there are no memoirs, no biography, like for example in the case of St. Francis, the great strength of the warrior saint. It's much more about what he symbolizes, much more the idea of the spear that defeats the sea monster or the dragon as the legend came to build, later than the actual facts. St. George is much more than the facts themselves. He is more than just an example. St. George is what humanity attributed to him: an unshakable faith, endless courage, and the victory of good over evil. And the warrior who became a saint. He certainly never imagined that, centuries later, we would be here telling his non-existent feat of defeating the non-existent dragon. Because it's a mythological monster that never existed? Or was it a giant serpent that did St. George really kill? But that's how legends are, and many oral traditions translate our dreams and fears into simple and powerful stories.